Your soul and your body now belong to me and Jay-Z. You must call us sir and accept everything we will do to you. Only then we will give you fame and success.
Liam Thompson was one of the victims of P. Diddy and Jay-Z's child trafficking, but he managed to escape. And in this video, we have the opportunity to hear his story, where he tells all the atrocities he was forced to do to American rappers. He tells how they operated and how he saw thousands of other victims go through what he went through. Imagine a talented young man, full of dreams, with the desire to become a great music producer and work alongside the biggest legends in the industry. He receives an invitation that seemed like the perfect opportunity. An influential agent promises to introduce him to none other than P. Diddy and Jay-Z, two of the biggest names in music. But upon entering the doors of a luxurious studio in New York, Liam Thompson enters a dark universe that has stolen not only his body, but his soul. Now, after years of silence, he is ready to reveal the darkest secrets of a scheme that no one dared expose. Before diving into this terrifying story, subscribe to the channel to follow more shocking stories like this. And share this video to warn others of the monsters that P. Diddy and Jay-Z are. Liam Thompson's account begins like this.
Hello, my name is Liam Thompson, and this is the story of how the dream I had since I was a child was destroyed by two men the world idolizes, P. Diddy and Jay-Z. To you, they may be music legends, but to me, they are monsters who destroyed my life. And only today, after the news broke, did I have the courage to speak my case. So please don't say that I'm lying or that you don't believe me, because I'm the victim. I grew up in a small town in Alabama with my grandparents. My parents died when I was 8 years old, and music was the only thing that helped me overcome that loss. I've always been fascinated by instruments, creating melodies and composing. Since I was little, I dreamed of being a music producer and working with the biggest names in the industry. In my room, using an old laptop and cheap headphones, I spent hours creating music that I imagined would one day be played to millions of people. At the age of 15, I started performing at small events in my city. It was at one of these competitions that I met Marcus Lang. He approached me after the presentation, well-dressed, with a smile that seemed genuine. He said he worked in the music industry and had connections to big names like P. Diddy and Jay-Z. At first, I didn't believe it. After all, why would someone so important be at a small event like that? But he seemed to know everything about music, production, and even mentioned artists he'd helped launch. Marcus said something I'll never forget. You have real talent, Liam. With my help, you could be on the big stage before you're 18. That was like listening to an angel. He promised exclusive mentorship with access to the biggest names in music, and told me that Diddy and Jay-Z were always looking for young talent like me to collaborate on special projects. He insisted he needed a quick response. He said that if I accepted, he would take care of everything. Tickets to New York, a studio to work in, even accommodation. I was elated, but my first reaction was to tell my grandparents. My grandparents were suspicious, especially my grandmother. She warned me that things too good to be true often come with a high price. But Marcus was convincing, and I was completely enthralled by the idea of being around music icons. He even showed videos of supposed students of his who had gotten contracts and were working on major record labels. After a few calls and promises that I would be safe, my grandparents agreed. After all, my grandparents didn't have much education or money, so it really felt like it was the opportunity of a lifetime. On March 23rd, I will never forget that date, I left for New York with a head full of dreams. I imagined myself in a big studio, learning from P. Diddy and Jay-Z, two men who, up until that point, were heroes to me. When I arrived, Marcus took me to a luxurious building in the heart of Manhattan. He said it was one of Diddy's private studios, and that I was privileged to be able to be there. I could hardly believe it. The city was huge, and everything seemed perfect. At first, he introduced me to other young people who, like me, also dreamed of music. Marcus told us that this place was the beginning of something big and that we needed to be grateful for the opportunity. For a few days, I truly believed I was living my dream. But looking back, I should have seen the signs. I should have noticed that Marcus wasn't just an agent. He was the first link in a chain of abuse and control that Diddy and Jay-Z ran behind the scenes in the music industry. I was about to discover that the dream I'd had since I was a child was, in fact, a trap. The first few days in New York, I truly believed I was in the right place. Marcus treated me well, said he was investing in me, and the studio I worked at seemed like something out of a dream. He showed me rooms filled with state-of-the-art equipment, walls covered in gold records, and even photos of P. Diddy and Jay-Z with other famous artists. A week after arriving, Marcus told me that I would have the chance to meet them both. He told me that P. Diddy was famous for his business acumen, and that Jay-Z was one of the biggest creative geniuses in the industry. According to him, these two men were responsible for transforming young talents into superstars. He further added that they didn't give opportunities to just anyone, so I should be grateful for this chance. When I finally met them, I was nervous. It was a large room, full of leather sofas and huge windows overlooking the city. P. Diddy arrived first, surrounded by security guards and an air of authority that made the atmosphere feel heavy. He greeted me coldly, with a smile that seemed more formal than genuine. He told me, "I've heard about you. I hope you know that playing this game means following the rules, my rules." Soon after, Jay-Z entered the room. He was calmer, almost casual, but his eyes, there was something there, a coldness that bothered me. He said little at first, but when Diddy mentioned that I was a good investment, Jay-Z just laughed, as if he already knew he had complete control of the situation. After that first meeting, Marcus explained to me that I needed to prove myself. This meant recording music, attending events, and being available whenever called upon. I didn't question it after all. They were music legends, and in my mind, any sacrifice would be worth it. But things started to change quickly. Diddy started calling me to meetings that had nothing to do with music. He said they were teachable moments. But these meetings took place at parties full of rich and influential people, where the music was drowned out by laughter and low-pitched conversations, in addition to having a lot of drugs and alcohol. At these parties, he and Jay-Z watched me from afar, as if they were analyzing my every move, as if they wanted to know how far I would accept going on my own. At one of these parties, a much older man came up and put his hand on my shoulder, saying something like, "You're lucky to be here. Don't waste this opportunity." When I looked to Diddy for help, he just nodded, as if approving of the contact. These encounters made me uncomfortable, but Marcus always said, "That's how the game works, Liam. If you want success, you have to be willing to play." One day, Diddy called me for a private meeting in a smaller room at the studio. He offered me a glass of whiskey, even though I was underage, and started talking about loyalty. He said that to be part of his world, I would need to prove that I was committed, that I trusted him. "No one gets to the top without sacrifices, Liam," he said. "You trust me, right?" I wanted to say yes, but something about the way he looked at me made my throat catch. At that moment, I began to understand that something was very wrong. After that, things only got worse. Jay-Z started appearing more frequently, but he was different. He was calculating, manipulative. He spoke as if he was trying to convince me that I had no choice. "If you want to be here, you need to understand that this world is not for the weak," he said with a smile that chilled my spine. The promise of success that brought me to New York was starting to feel like a trap. I wasn't an artist being developed. I was a pawn in a game controlled by two monsters who treated people like disposable tools. I thought I was living a dream, but I quickly realized I was trapped in a nightmare that even my worst thoughts couldn't imagine. Diddy and Jay-Z were not the mentors Marcus had promised. They were predators, monsters who used power, fame, and money to control and destroy lives. I'm going to tell you what they did to me, and you will agree with me. Parties were the beginning of everything. Marcus took me to these mansions full of luxury, where men and women laughed loudly and walked around with glasses of drinks in their hands. The lights were dim, and the muffled sound made the environment oppressive. At first, I just watched, but soon I started to notice something was wrong. The looks were different. They were like predators watching prey. And the worst thing is that it wasn't just me. I saw several girls and boys my age and even younger. I was always touted as the next big thing, but the questions they asked weren't about music. Where are you from? How do you like the city? But always with that dubious tone, as if they already knew I had nowhere to run. Diddy and Jay-Z were distant at first, just watching me, but over time they started calling me for private conversations in dark rooms, if you know what I mean. Diddy had a peculiar way of approaching me, always with that forced smile and a heavy hand on my shoulder. He talked about how everything in the industry depended on trust and loyalty. I make the rules, boy, and you're going to follow them all, or else, he said, leaving the end of the sentence hanging in the air. But the look in his eyes said it all. These meetings grew stranger and more terrifying every day. Jay-Z was more direct, but in a way that made my skin crawl. He spoke in riddles, testing me, trying to make me understand that there was no way out. You know, Liam, in this world, you either obey or disappear, and no one will care if you disappear. One night at one of the parties, I was taken to a separate room. It was small, windowless, with a dim light that dangled from the ceiling. Diddy and Jay-Z were there, along with Marcus, who looked nervous. Diddy told me to sit down, but his tone wasn't a request, it was an order. When I hesitated, he grabbed my arm so hard I almost screamed. "Sit down, boy. There's no room for weakness here." Jay-Z approached with a cold smile. He put his hands on my leg, bent down to my height, and said, "You want to be big, don't you? You want the world to know you. Then you're going to have to pay the price." He held me by the chin and made me look directly into his eyes. "We are the gods of this game, and you are just another piece. Understood?" At that moment, I felt my stomach drop. I wasn't a person to them. I was property, something they could use, manipulate, and discard whenever they wanted. They started giving me increasingly disturbing orders. On one occasion, Diddy told me to go to one of the guests and keep him company all night and sleep with him. Otherwise, the price I would pay was with my life. I asked what that meant, and he just smiled. "You're smart, you'll figure it out." When I hesitated, he grabbed my arm again. "Don't you understand yet? Here, either you obey or you'll learn the hard way." The man I was sent to was much older, with a grotesque smile that made me want to run away. He touched me, kissed me, but on this specific occasion, I managed to back away. When I went back to the room where Diddy and Jay-Z were shaking with fear, they just laughed. "He's stubborn," Jay-Z said. Diddy approached and spoke quietly, almost whispering, "This is just the beginning. You will learn to follow the rules, even if I have to break you." And they started to break, not just physically, but mentally. Jay-Z isolated me more and more, demanding that I not talk to anyone without his permission. He said I was special, but always with that manipulative tone, as if I should feel grateful to be under his control. Diddy was more cruel. He used his power to humiliate me in front of others. At a party, he made me get down on my knees while he talked about how I should prove my loyalty. I wanted to run, I wanted to scream for help, but I knew no one would hear me. These parties were full of influential people. Politicians, police officers, famous artists. Everyone saw what was happening, but no one said anything. They just laughed or pretended not to see. Diddy and Jay-Z weren't just music icons. They were monsters that controlled lives as if they were pieces on a board, and I was just another victim in their game. After that night, any hope I still had was crushed. P. Diddy and Jay-Z didn't need to scream or hit to make me feel like nothing. They had an even worse method, slow destruction. They broke your mind, took away everything that made you feel human, and replaced it with fear. Diddy was the most unpredictable. Sometimes he would show up at the studio and act like he was my best friend. He smiled, made jokes, and even praised my songs. "You're talented, Liam," he'd say. But at other times, he was an unstoppable force, capable of reducing me to nothingness with a single sentence. One time, he invited me to his house for a private dinner. I thought it would be about music, maybe some opportunity, but when I arrived, I realized it was something very different. There was no one there, just Diddy and two men I'd never seen before. They made me sit at the table while they watched me, as if they were deciding what to do with me. Diddy put his hand on my shoulder, squeezing hard. "You know I gave you everything, don't you?" he asked. Before I could respond, he continued, "You owe me, and boy, do I always collect my debts." And today, that day, has arrived. The men started laughing, and I felt my body freeze. Diddy pulled out a chair to sit in front of me. "Here's the reality, Liam. Either you give me what I want, or I destroy you. And not just you. I know where your grandparents live. I know everything about them." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run away, but I knew I couldn't. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the drink on his breath. "I control you, boy. You belong to me now." And that night, Diddy did everything he wanted to me, if you know what I mean. Jay-Z, on the other hand, was more calculating. He didn't need to raise his voice or make direct threats. He used words to manipulate me, to make me believe I was insignificant. "Do you think you can get out of here?" he asked once, staring at me as I trembled. "Do you think anyone will believe you? Look at me, Liam. I'm Jay-Z. I'm the law." He asked me questions as if he was playing with my mind. "Do you know what happens to those who disobey?" he asked, with a cold smile. When I didn't respond, he would laugh and say, "You'll find out if you try something." One night, they took me to one of the rooms in Diddy's mansion. It was large but empty, with just a bed in the center and dim lights on the walls. They said I needed to learn to be strong. What happened in that room still haunts me. Diddy and Jay-Z put me in humiliating and inhumane situations, forcing me to do their bidding while laughing. Every word they said was like a knife digging into my dignity. They called these lessons, but they were torture in disguise. Jay-Z cut my face once and said, "You won't forget who's in charge here, ever." Diddy, on the other hand, had a way of making everything a wicked game. He would say things like, "You want to be famous? Welcome to the price of fame, boy." He did this while forcing me into submissive positions or performing acts that no young person should experience. I no longer felt like eating or sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, those cold smiles, those threats. I knew that if I stayed there, I would never make it out alive, at least not as the person I was before. These two monsters were not just criminals. They were masters at destroying dreams, at taking from you everything that made life worth living. I got to a point where all I felt was fear. Diddy and Jay-Z had taken over not only my body, but also my mind. I could no longer look in the mirror without feeling ashamed, without feeling that I was no longer a person, just a shadow of the boy who dreamed of music. It was in this state that I spent my days in the studio pretending everything was fine, while working on songs that I knew would never be mine. The other people around also pretended not to see what was happening, but I knew they knew. It was there that I met Lucas, a sound engineer who seemed different. He wasn't like Marcus or Diddy and Jay-Z's other employees. He was discreet, but somehow made me feel like he was observing me with empathy, not property. One night, after a long studio session, Lucas pulled me aside while the security guards were distracted. "Liam, listen. I see what's happening to you. It can't go on like this." I remained silent, afraid that this was a trap, but Lucas seemed sincere. He looked around and whispered, "I've seen this before. You need to get out of here. They won't stop until they destroy you." I wanted to believe him, but the idea of running away seemed impossible. Diddy and Jay-Z controlled everything. Security guards were at every door, cameras monitored every corner, and even the other employees seemed loyal to them, but Lucas insisted. "I know a way out. It'll be risky, but it's your only chance." Over the next few days, Lucas started giving me little tips. He showed me a map of the building, marking an emergency exit that was used by delivery people. He observed the security guards' patterns, noting that there was a shift change that left the hallway empty for 2 minutes every night. "That's the range you have to go to," he said. The plan seemed crazy, but I had no other choice. I knew that if I continued there, my soul would be completely consumed. I asked Lucas why he was helping me, and he replied, "I have a brother your age, and I wouldn't want what's happening to you to happen to him. I'm only doing this job because without it, my family would die of hunger." On the night of the escape, Lucas put $100 in my pocket and took charge of diverting the security guards' attention, pretending that there was a technical problem in the studio. While they investigated, I ran down the empty hallway trying not to make any noise. My heart was beating so loud I thought they could hear it. I reached the emergency door, but to my dismay, it was locked. I started to panic, thinking I had been cheated on or that something had gone wrong. But then I remembered a key Lucas had discreetly given me the night before. My hands were shaking so much that it took me a few seconds to unlock the door. When the door finally opened, the cold night air hit me, and for the first time in months, I felt something like hope. I ran, without looking back, past dark alleys and empty streets. I knew they discovered my escape as soon as I heard the alarm start to sound in the building. I ran until my legs couldn't take it anymore. Finally, I saw a train station. I took any train, not caring where I was going, as long as it was far away. As the train moved, tears began to stream down my face. I was free, but I knew that freedom came with a price. Diddy and Jay-Z wouldn't let it go. They would hunt me down, as they did everyone who tried to escape. I thought the worst was over when I fled that building. For a moment inside the train, I imagined everything would end well. But I underestimated the reach and power of P. Diddy and Jay-Z. The next day, I woke up in an empty carriage. The train already stopped in an unfamiliar city. I didn't know where I was, but I was sure I needed to keep moving. I walked the streets trying to find somewhere safe, but all I felt was fear. Every car that passed slowly, every look from a stranger seemed like a threat. Hours later, I found a coffee shop. I went in, bought a coffee with the money Lucas had given me, and sat in the farthest corner. It was there that I saw the first evidence that they were looking for me. A man in a dark suit entered the cafe holding a photo. It was my photo. He asked the attendant something, who shook her head. But as he looked around, I huddled in my seat, trying to appear invisible. My heart almost stopped when he walked past my table. Luckily, he left without noticing me, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they found me. Over the next few days, I realized the hunt was just beginning. I hid in homeless shelters where no one asked questions. But even there, I heard rumors of men asking questions about a runaway boy. One night, while sleeping in a corner of an abandoned building, I was awakened by heavy footsteps. It was a group of men, clearly looking for me. They were armed, calling my name loudly. "You can run, Liam, but you can't hide!" one of them shouted, and the voice echoed off the walls of the building. I kept thinking, how did they find me? How do you know I ended up here? That's when I remembered that P. Diddy ran the town and knew everything, so he knew where the train had left me. And it's in his interest to find me, to end me after all. If I spoke, I could destroy everything they built, although it would be practically impossible because even the police attended those parties. I huddled behind a pillar, holding my breath. One of them passed so close that I could smell cigarettes in the air. It was pure luck that they didn't see me that night. But the threat didn't stop there. Diddy and Jay-Z's henchmen started calling my grandparents, threatening them. My grandparents were very desperate, as they thought I was living a dream, and suddenly they were surprised by threatening calls. I knew this when I was finally able to use a payphone to call them. My grandmother's voice was full of fear. "Liam, they know where we live. They left notes on our door. They said if you don't come back, we will pay the price." My heart sank. I knew I needed to do something, but I was alone, without money, and every step I took seemed to bring me closer to them. However, I was a little lucky. An activist named Michael found me when I was sleeping in an alley. He was part of a group that helped victims of exploitation, and he seemed to know that I was running away from something terrible. "You're safe with me for now," he said, as he led me to a secret shelter. There, I finally had a moment to breathe. Michael explained to me that he had heard about Diddy and Jay-Z and how they used young people as tools for their own perverse interests. "They have friends everywhere," he warned me, "but we have ours too." I wanted to believe I was safe, but the reality was clear. As long as Diddy and Jay-Z were free, I would never truly be safe. After I managed to escape, Michael and the activists did everything they could to convince me to report what Diddy and Jay-Z had done to me. They said the world needed to know, that more victims could emerge if I told my story. But I just couldn't do it. I was traumatized and scared that the worst would happen to my family. The idea of facing those two monsters paralyzed me. I knew what they were capable of, I knew they had friends everywhere: politicians, businessmen, police officers. They were untouchable, protected by a system that silenced anyone who dared challenge them. Michael tried to reassure me that he and his group would protect me, but I couldn't trust anyone. With every step I took, every door I walked through, I was afraid they were there, ready to take me back. So I made the hardest decision of my life: to walk away from everything. I left the shelter and started moving from city to city, changing my name, living in anonymity. I tried to rebuild my life, but it was like I was always running, like their shadow was always behind me. The years passed, and I tried to bury what happened. But even though I tried to move on, the memories haunted me. I had nightmares almost every night, reliving those parties, those closed rooms, Diddy's cold laughs, and Jay-Z's cruel gaze. I felt guilty, as if I were abandoning other victims to my silence, but the fear was greater. What could I do against two of the most powerful men in the world? It was only now, years later, that things began to change. When the first allegations against Diddy and Jay-Z surfaced, I was in shock. I thought no one would ever have the courage to face them, but suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. Seeing other victims speaking out, putting their stories out into the world, gave me courage I never had before. For the first time, I felt like maybe there was a chance to do something, to finally tell my story. Today, I'm still afraid. I still think about the threats, their eyes, the words that echoed in my mind for years. But now, at least I know I'm not alone anymore. After so much time running away, trying to forget what happened, seeing the allegations against P. Diddy and Jay-Z was like a storm of emotions. I felt fear, anger, and even shame for having remained silent for so long. But most of all, I felt something I didn't think possible: hope. The voices of other victims began to spread, revealing the same horrors I had experienced. It was like looking into a mirror. Their stories reminded me of everything from the tension-filled parties to the threats that kept me silent for years. They were very similar stories because, in fact, the standards that P. Diddy and Jay's followed were the same. Inspired by these brave people, I realized it was time to stop running. I wasn't ready to share my story with the world yet, but I knew I could help in other ways. I started looking for organizations that offered support to victims of exploitation and abuse, wanting to contribute what little I had. Today, I volunteer at an NGO that helps young people identify and escape dangerous schemes like the one that almost destroyed my life. I work with teenagers, many of them full of dreams like I had when I was younger. I share what I've learned, teaching them how to recognize the signs of manipulation and how to protect themselves from people who want to use their dreams as traps. I also help organize temporary shelters for those who manage to escape, ensuring they have a safe place to start over. Each young person who enters the shelter reminds me of who I was, and that gives me the strength to carry on. Although I have yet to tell my story publicly, I have finally found the courage to speak out in small circles, offering direct support to other victims who are also afraid to come forward. Telling them they are not alone is the most powerful thing I can do. The most important thing is that today I know that Diddy and Jay-Z didn't beat me. As much as they stole years of my life, they didn't steal my humanity. They tried to break me, but somehow I survived. The battle is far from over. There are still powerful people who protect monsters like them, but every story that comes to light is a step towards justice, and I want to be a part of that, not for revenge, but to ensure no young person goes through what I went through. I still don't know if I'll ever have the courage to tell everything publicly, but for now, helping other victims find the strength to fight is enough for me. What Diddy and Jay-Z did to me is something that will never be erased, but today, I use that pain as fuel to help others escape the darkness.